Extreme, absolutely.
The passing on of the founding father of Namibia, Sam Nujoma, is a great loss to the continent, but I think it is important for us to speak to those who knew him very well, those who have worked with the late former President Sam Nujoma. Former President Thabo Mbeki is going to share with us the life and time of former President Sam Nujoma, but also as a comrade, a person that he worked with even when he was the head of state of South Africa. Mr. President, thank you for your time. Let's start perhaps at the personal level. How do you know the late former President Sam Nujoma? Where did you meet?
Well, it's such a long time ago, so it would have been when I came to Lusaka in 1971, having spent a few years in Europe. Came back to the ANC headquarters in 1972. That would have been when I met him physically, I think. But you know, the President Nujoma was one of our leaders. I mean, one of our leaders in a real sense of that word, because we didn't treat him as a leader belonging to another organization. He was one of our own leaders. President Nujoma, because of the relationship between SWAPO and the ANC. For instance, 1977, 78, I was the ANC representative in Nigeria. And when we got there, we found a SWAPO representative already there, Konja Kambala. And what we did was we merged the two offices. So it was one organization. We both of us published journals, but with one editor, and I led the group. Publicly, we spoke as two different organizations, but functioned as one. And even when President Nujoma came to visit Nigeria, we told him that, we reported that we're functioning as one office. And actually was not very happy with our report in this sense. He said, but why do you think it's necessary for you people to report that? Because that's exactly how you're supposed to work. So that was the relationship. I'm saying that the President Nujoma was to us one of our leaders. Not a leader of SWAPO, but a leader of our own struggle. That's the connection between the two organizations, because we both had one oppressor, which was the apartheid regime. And therefore, this common struggle for liberation was a common struggle to defeat the same enemy. And therefore, the two organizations worked very well together in that context, so that his loss, Comrade Sam Nujoma, is passing away now. Of course, we feel it as a personal loss, all of us who were there at the time. Is the last, I think, is the last of that generation of leaders who led that struggle to defeat colonialism and apartheid. And so he represents, in a sense, the end of an age, and the end of an age and end of a generation which did a lot, and gave an example as to what needs to be done. And indeed, even when I became president, they were already independent, and he was president of Namibia. We worked in that context. You'd remember that, for instance, Walvis Bay. Walvis Bay was, in terms of those colonial arrangements, part of South African territory. Unlike the rest of Namibia was in a colony. But Walvis Bay was, in that relation, in that context, South African territory. And we decided in 1994 that we are not going to enter into any negotiations with the government of Namibia about this, because this is Namibian territory. So we just handed it over. We said this is Namibian territory. This point is argument of the apartheid regime that is South African territory. Like the way the Americans argue about Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That is American. We wouldn't take a position like that, because I'm saying of our relationship with SWAPO. And therefore, with President Nujoma, we handed over Walvis Bay because we thought it was Namibian territory. So even in a matter which continues to be discussed now, which is that historically, internationally, where you have a river or a waterway, which is a boundary between two countries, normally what happens is the boundary is drawn in the middle of the waterway. And therefore the argument that the boundary between South Africa and Namibia should be in the middle of the Orange River. And the position we took was that we didn't need that. The colonial boundary, which according to the OAU, we must respect those boundaries. The South African boundary is on the northern bank of the Orange River. So the entirety of the Orange River is South African. And so, of course, naturally the matter is raised, well, why don't we do what is done internationally and throw it in the middle of the river? And our own view was that we don't need to go through all of that. And we said to our Namibian comrades that, look, the boundary, according to these colonial things, is on the northern border. But in terms of our relations, you have access to the entirety of the Orange River. So we won't arrest you because your boat or somebody is on the southern bank of the Orange. That you have entire access to this, and we can write that down, and there's no need to be engaging in these detailed negotiations which go for international arbitration and all that. I am just saying, Sophie, it was describing the nature of our relationship with the Namibians, and President Nujoma was very fundamental in terms of defining those relations as relations of comradeship, as I was saying, against a common enemy. Indeed, that in the end we work for the same goal.
Mr. President, I remember the World Summit on Sustainable Development here in Johannesburg, that heated debate, even calling out the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, quite a straight talker, President Nujoma.
He was indeed a straight talker. He was never a diplomat. But it was never intended to offend people. It was not unnecessary aggressiveness. It was the need to state clearly what the correct positions were. And he had that capacity to do that. He didn't hesitate. As I say, I don't think it caused harm anyway. People might not have liked it, but it was not ill-intentioned, it was not aggressive, it was not intended to embarrass anybody, including Tony Blair, but indeed to represent the truth as it was. And nobody, I've never heard anybody complain about that he is too honest and too straightforward. Because I think people understood why he spoke the way he did.
The formation of the AU, he was there, you became the first chair of the AU, transformation of the Organization of African Unity to the AU. The role he played in terms of supporting that process.
Well, I mean, we were all of us together in the process of that transition from the OAU to the AU. I must say that the person who pushed this matter very hard and very correctly was Colonel Gaddafi. It's him who insisted on this, that we needed an organization that was more assertive about these issues of African unity than the OAU, that you need an African organization which, for instance, would not say in a situation where war crimes are being committed in one country, you say, no, that's an internal affair, that would be wrong. That as Africans, we owe an obligation to one another, and therefore you need a different kind of organization. So I'm saying that it really is basically Colonel Gaddafi who led this matter very correctly, and we then supported him. And as a region here, we worked effectively, worked together. And in our case, in talking relation with SWAPO, the advantage was that we are not, of course we are all independent states by now, but the fact of the matter is that there was this other basis for our relationship, which is the old relationship between liberation movements. So that all of these issues about African unity, African Renaissance, had been matters that were discussed as liberation movements, come to the same common position, so that in terms of the cooperation with regard to the transition from the OAU to the AU, we continue to work together in the same spirit as inspired our working together as liberation movements.
You spoke about the relationship with the African National Congress. I think the role that he played in strengthening the frontline states.
Well, of course, the Namibia, well, you remember Namibia became independent in 1990. You see, by this time, I think essentially the frontline states had played their role. Because the main focus then became, after that, basically what we do with regard to South Africa. And Namibia was being Namibia led by SWAPO, an old ally of the African National Congress, of course, were very supportive of all of that. But I'm trying to say that in terms of the context of the grouping called the Frontline States, by the time, after Namibia's independence, by that time, in a sense, it's kind of response to the region as a whole had narrowed, because the only country that was not liberated by then, after the liberation of Namibia, was South Africa. So they just focused on South Africa. And we ourselves, as usual, I mean, even supported the independence of Namibia. Even you remember that even when during the election campaign, you remember there's a whole fleet of our taxis that went to Namibia to help them to collect people to go to the voting stations. That's because we had discussed the matter with NAFCOC and said to NAFCOC that they are going to require, at those first elections, that as many of the voters come to the polling stations as possible. And that given this is a colony of South Africa. Obviously, the means of transport for the ordinary people to get there would not be as good as would be required. And that's why we sent a whole fleet, NAFCOC did, at our request, sent a whole fleet of taxis there that ferried people to the elections for the first elections in Namibia. But again, it was an indication of the closeness of the relationship.
His passing on comes at a time where the liberation organizations are really dealing with lots of challenges. For example, Namibia today, the Supreme Court is hearing a matter where opposition is contesting the presidential election results. How do we learn from people like late former President Sam Nujoma, particularly the Liberation Organization, in terms of that commitment and selflessness?
Well, I'm very glad indeed that naturally, as you would imagine, we followed the last elections, Namibian elections, quite closely. And I'm very glad that the opposition parties decided to go to court, so that when they contest the outcome, unlike what has happened in Mozambique. I think the reason SWAPO did the way the opposition in Namibia did the way that they are doing now, taking the matter to court again, was because of the tradition established by people like Sam Nujoma in terms of the establishment of the democracy in Namibia. Remember that at some point they changed the constitution of Namibia so that President Nujoma served an extra term. We discussed that matter in the region, and all of us came to the same conclusion that it was important to, first of all, to protect the democracy in Namibia, but secondly, to protect the stability in the country, to take away any sense of conflict. And therefore, it seemed then to all of us at the time that the transition in Namibia required that constitutional change should be made. But again, it was accepted to the population. This has happened. So I'm saying that the Sam Nujoma, Uncle Sam, we called him Uncle Sam, and that leadership established particular practices in terms of the democratization of Namibia, which I think have become entrenched in Namibian society. Which, as I say, is that's why I think you get the opposition now in Namibia, which I saw that they were quite militant on the matter about the outcome of the elections, that nevertheless they went to the courts to resolve this matter rather than do what has been happening in Mozambique.
Mr. President, you also, with the late former President Mandela, tried to resolve the DRC question, which is still a sticky point to date.
Yes, I mean, with regard to the DRC question, you remember that Namibia, Zimbabwe, Angola, went into the Congo 1998, I think it was, when there was a war that broke out between the DRC, led by the late Laurent Kabila, and them on this side, in Angola, Uganda and Rwanda, the other side. And these other countries from Southern Africa intervened because it was a principle of the of SADC that as a unit we owed one another self-defense. So when it became necessary to act in defense of the independence of Angola, of Congo, Namibia was part of that grouping. So it was indeed being loyal to a common position about that kind of regional solidarity. The person, you remember, the person who led the process for the negotiations that resolved all of these outstanding issues in the Congo, leading to the elections 2006, formation of a new government and all that, was late President Masire. So even when they came and located here and met at Sun City, the chief negotiator was President Masire. And when we intervened, it was to support him. So, but the region was very, very supportive in this regard, and everybody I think was very much behind South Africa in what South Africa had to do to assist the Congolese to get to where they wanted to get to, which is a peaceful, united, democratic Congo, dealt with all these problems which are currently being dealt with. During the negotiations at Sun City, they even adopted a resolution on the defense and protection of the minorities in the Congo. This was because of this issue, which persists to this day, of the Banyamulenge and so on, that these are Congolese and must be treated like other Congolese. That's why the formal resolution on the defense and protection of the minorities was adopted at the Sun City thing, with other decisions about how in the interim period and afterwards there would be proper integration in the armed forces and government, etc. And after that agreement, so we're quite certain that this matter of the unity of the Congolese people in all their different ethnic formations, that they would work together in terms of that constitution, that it was also important to deal with the region, which is why we then requested the presidents of the Congo, Joseph Kabila, and Paul Kagame from Rwanda, to come together and let's discuss the issue of the relations between the two of you. And indeed met in Pretoria, and they signed an agreement dealing with relations between the two countries, including how they should deal with these two issues. One being the Banyamulenge, the other one being the FDLR, these former genocide people who would come from Rwanda into the Eastern Congo. That was resolved and so on. Problem that occurred with regard to that agreement was that the Congolese government did not do what was agreed in the agreement, which was the disarming of the FDLR. So I'm saying the issues that are being discussed now are old issues. And it was clear then, this is a long time ago, that the issue of the Banyamulenge, for instance, you could never resolve it by military means. It required a political solution, and the political solution was one that they found at Sun City. We're all Congolese. Any differences among ourselves, we must meet and resolve them among ourselves. As I say, even the constitution, based on what was agreed at Sun City, recognized the fact that as Congolese, they must try and work together. But in the practice, of course, they didn't do what is both in the constitution and was in the agreement, which is why you have this persisting agreement, and then it's still, the matter is not changed. The solutions are no different. You can't solve the problem of the Banyamulenge by military means. You can't. It requires political means. That's the only way to do it. Unfortunately, this summit now in Dar es Salaam between SADC and East African Community, I think they've taken that position. We better, as Congolese, had better talk to one another, including government of Congo talking to the M23. They have to. And the countries in the region also need to take a particular posture, including how to resolve the matter of the FDLR in the Eastern Congo. That Congolese government and Rwandan government need to join hands to solve this problem. These are old positions, agreed a long time ago, but unfortunately it's in the implementation that there have been failures. But as I said, the solutions haven't changed.
And finally, as we wrap up, what is your message to the Namibians and President Nujoma's family?
Yes, of course, I mean, really sincere condolences to the family, to Uncle Sam's family, and sincere condolences to SWAPO, as well as, of course, the sister people of Namibia. I think fortunately, I know the new president, Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwa. I knew her when she was very young in Lusaka, so I've seen her grown up in SWAPO. So I'm very, very confident that in her, you have a leader of Namibia who would really want to follow in the footsteps of President Nujoma with regard to these matters about service to the people, loyalty to principle, and a strong sense of Pan-Africanism. I think that I'm quite sure they will also respect whatever is decided by the courts with regard to the elections. But I think that I know there are many people in Namibia, not just members of SWAPO, who really respect practically what Sam Nujoma and his colleagues stood for, and would want to do would never want to betray that kind of legacy. But indeed, our sincere condolences to all of them, the Namibian people, SWAPO, the family. But I hope that from our side here, from the South African side, we would also want to do the same, to really continue to respect the nature of the relations that there were between SWAPO and ourselves, struggling against a common enemy, that we still confront a common enemy of poverty and all of that. And therefore the cooperation between us and the Namibians is really in honor of President Nujoma. Even from our side, the South African side, I think becomes very, very important. But I think that he must continue to serve as a cement, President Sam Nujoma, between our people here and the people of Namibia, and the leadership in both countries.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. President.
Thanks, Sophie.